Alright guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be discussing what made the Shadow Priest so strong in the Burning Crusade. Obviously when I say Shadow Priest is strong, I'm definitely not talking about their DPS. The true value of a Shadow Priest is the stupidly strong support that it actually brings to the raid. They're probably the strongest support class in the game, well in the Burning Crusade, next to a Shaman. Now this doesn't mean that Shadow Priests are stacked out in raids. You're probably only going to see 1 to 2 in a 25-man raiding group. And I don't think those world first hardcore guilds will actually use a lot of Shadow Priests. They probably won't use any at all, and that's simply because they'll stack loads of Warlocks and Hunters just to get it done. But you will see Shadow Priests in really high demand in your kind of like typical normal hardcore guilds and more casual guilds. When it comes to dungeons, the Shadow Priest is probably the most loved class in a dungeon next to a Prot Paladin. If you've got a Prot Paladin and a Shadow Priest in your group, it's going to be a really smooth run. It's important to note that the amount of DPS a Shadow Priest actually provides for raid is very hard to measure because you won't physically see it on a DPS meter, because it's actually way more significant than people realise, because Shadow Priests give the raid mana and healing, which can be then turned into mana, and obviously there's loads of debuffs that a Shadow Priest provides as well, which increases the maximum DPS of the entire raid. Just before we jump in guys, apparently only 11% of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed to the channel, so I would appreciate if people did actually quickly subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to see more content like this. So what made a Shadow Priest so strong in the Burning Crusade? The first element we're going to be looking at is Vampiric Touch, which is a debuff applied to the target. Obviously it deals damage, which scales with your spell power, but the main thing that's interesting about this debuff is 5% of your total shadow damage generates mana for the whole party. Depending on the raid fight, this meant that you can give a cast DPS about 25% of their mana back, which is obviously very useful because when caster DPS are low geared and they don't have a lot of money to spend on mana potions, this is an absolute godsend so that they don't go oomed like in the last phases of a fight, because that would obviously massively reduce their DPS. They're also really good on progression bosses because obviously when you're progressing on a boss you're probably fairly undergeared for that boss, which means that the fight's probably going to last a very long time because you just don't have a DPS to kill it in a decent amount of time, which means you're going to have to spend more mana to do your DPS. So when you bring a Shadow Priest, the mana of every single caster DPS and every single healer will have more endurance in those longer fights. And obviously this mana efficiency is also very useful in long arena fights. The next element we're going to look at is Vampiric Embrace. So this is basically a debuff that Shadow Priest applied to the target, which means about 25% of shadow damage is actually dealt as healing for the entire party. It's 15% when it's not talented, but when you have it talented it will be up to 25%. So what this does is it provides a constant flow of background healing onto the party, and it's great at countering dot damage from bosses, and it saves the healers even more mana, because obviously less healing will actually be required onto the raid. It also allows Warlocks to be a little bit more reckless with their life tap ability. Life tap, if you don't know, will take health from the Warlock and bring that back as mana. It also helps Paladin out with Seal of Blood, which whenever you use Seal of Blood, every single of your melee swings basically will actually drain your health. In fact, a Paladin probably benefits from being in the same group as a Shadow Priest out of any other class. It's simply because of the ability Spiritual Attunement, which means every time they get healed, they also generate mana. So they're going to get they're going to get mana from Vampiric Touch and Vampiric Embrace. So Paladins get a ridiculous amount of mana back with a Shadow Priest in the group. And AoE healing is really good in Battlegrounds and for Arena. Next, let's have a look at some of the debuffs that Shadow Priest have. First of all, we have Shadow Weaving. It's a debuff that causes the target to take 10% more shadow damage, and this is very useful because Warlocks are the best DPS in the game and will be massively stacked, so that's a ridiculous DPS boost for the entire raid. Next we have Misery, which is basically just the same thing as Shadow Weaving, but it's only 5% and it's for every single spell type, so a massive DPS boost from every single caster DPS in the game, and yeah, just overall really strong. Next, let's start looking at all the other kind of cool things that a Shadow Priest can do and how good their support toolkit really is. First of all, they have a really good single target purge and dispel, which is called Dispel Magic. It removes 2 buffs from an enemy and then 2 debuffs from a friendly target. They also have Master Spell, which removes 1 debuff from a friendly and 1 buff from an enemy within a 15-yard radius, so that is really good against certain raid mechanics and obviously very good in PvP, and they also have Abolish Disease, which keeps removing diseases every 5 seconds. Obviously they have the iconic typical priest buffs, the stamina buff and the shadow protection buff. They can use the ability Mind Soothe to skip certain dungeon and raid trash. That's quite useful if you're trying to do raids a little bit faster. You can use Mind Control in a number of gimmicky, strange ways. The full potential of Mind Control really hasn't fully been realised in my opinion yet. I've used Mind Control in Shattered Halls to mind control a certain mob, which I can then use a certain ability that mob had to provide really good shadow resistance buffs and stamina buffs for the rest of the party. And then I was mind controlling some of the other melee mobs so that did like 2k DPS, which is pretty ridiculous. So mind control is a very interesting ability. We also have stuff like Shackle Undead, which are very useful when you're doing trash pulls in Karazhan and also on the Morose fight. You also have Fear Ward, which is obviously very useful, especially against Nightbane, because you need to ward against a certain fear mechanic on the tanks. The last thing to note is that Draenei have an extra mana regeneration spell for the party called Symbol of Hope, and it's basically very similar to a mini mana tide totem. It will actually provide 333 MP5 for the entire party. So let's start talking about the actual DPS and the overall playstyle. So in my opinion, Shadow Priest has the most interesting rotation out of any caster DPS, if not any DPS in the game during a Burning Crusade. You've got 3 debuffs to manage, you've got a main DPS ability, you've got a filler ability, and you've got an execute ability, and you've also got 2 DPS cooldowns. And then on top of this, you're obviously thinking about all the support that you're providing for the entire raid. So there's a lot to think about, a lot to keep you engrossed and interested and thinking about the spec. So a lot of people diss Shadow Priest for being really bad at DPS. The main reason people do that is because Shadow Priest don't scale very well with their gear. A simple reason for that is Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch don't crit, so that's kind of like a bit of an issue, so they can't massively fully benefit from a secondary stat. So that's kind of why they fall off a little bit. But in all honesty, I would ignore all that. I wouldn't let that deter you from playing the class, because you can actually do really good DPS and compete with other DPS if you know how to snapshot your dots on trinket procs and unused trinkets. It's a very simple tactic that people have been using in World of Warcraft for years, mainly in Cataclysm and Wrath of the Lich King, because I think they got rid of it in Warlords of Draenor, so maybe Mist and Pandaria as well. Anyway, what you do is you wait for a trinket to proc. It could be a trinket or it could be some other item like a set bonus or something like that. And then you use an unused trinket to basically stack a massive spell damage bonus, and then you refresh all your dots so that your dots benefit for that increased spell damage, and then you refresh them again when the spell damage buff is about 2 to 3 seconds about to fall off, about the same cast time as Vampiric Touch and the global cooldown of applying Shadow Word Death after Vampiric Touch. So then you use that before the fall off, and then it will continue to benefit from that spell damage buff until the dot basically falls off. If you snapshot your damage like that, which again is another really cool and interesting playstyle to add to your rotation, then you will do some pretty good DPS in my opinion. You will compete with the other DPS, or basically like a less well informed and more casual scrub DPS. We also have a really good mana cooldown called Shadow Fiend, which also scales with your spell damage and heroism buffs and stuff like that, so it is good to use Shadow Fiend to optimize your damage. You know, use it through heroism and use it about the similar time that your trinkets proc too. You have a threat drop tool called Fade, mainly useful for 5-mans because threat isn't a massive issue in raids, but obviously very useful for when the tank gets crowd controlled. You can also use it in a focus. But anyway, I think I've covered everything that I want to talk about. My name is Metagoblin. Until the next video, ciao. Power Word Shield protects yourself, so they're very good at actually countering damage, because one, you can protect yourself with Power Word Shield, and then you can break out a Shadow Form and actually do some healing if it's really needed. In fact, a lot of the time when I was raiding as a Shadow Priest, sometimes too many healers would die, and then I would basically become a healer. Like, I'd break out a Shadow Form and I'd just start healing, because that's what the raid leader would actually tell me to do. And a lot of the time that has saved us in from getting wiped on particular raids, so that's another cool thing to bear in mind. But anyway, I think I've covered everything that I want to talk about. My name is Metagoblin. Until the next video, ciao.